Next up, we have Jim Duncan. Jim grinds out a living by the word. Locally, he's written newspaper columns about alcoholism, sports, politics, art, civic imaging, and food, mastering none. Please welcome Jim to the stage.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I'm seeing a therapist in San Francisco. She has a lovely Scottish accent. And she asks me how I define myself. And amongst about 5 or 6 other things I throw out there is I say I'm an Iowan. She interrupts me immediately and says, "How do your people feel about that?" Well, I noticed that she had a bunch of Bill Bryson books on her library shelf, so I knew she expected me to stick my finger in my ear and twist it, prerequisite to answering any question. But I wasn't going to indulge her. Instead, I told her how my people felt about it. I told her we were ambivalent. Many, many moons ago, in what you people call the 19th century, my people came to the land of the tall grass. We traveled across the great Mitsugumi from Ireland. We carried the seeds of our tribe with us. And we visited the long grass in the prairies across the Mississippi, between the Mississippi and the Missouri. My grandmother's grandmother rode back to the tribe in Ireland and told them that the grass was so tall that it was 20 feet above the horses' heads some places. And that when it caught fire, you could see the fire in the sky glowing for 100 miles away. But the bravest of our warriors, they wandered out into the grass and they cut it down, and after it burned, they plowed it over and they planted the seeds that the tribe brought across the ocean. And things grew amazingly well in Iowa. We grew things that had never been so big and never so large. My grandmother's grandmother wrote again, back to the tribe in Ireland, "Fern, you never saw such fucking onions." And squashes, and garlic, and everything else. And the tribe grew rich and powerful, and they had everything they needed for their families to eat. And they were proud to be called Iowans. And they continued to plant things until finally they discovered that the Native Americans who had preceded them there had discovered that one of the prairie grasses could be genetically altered so that it could be turned from a grass into a grain. And they planted what they called corn. And the corn grew taller than anything else. It grew as tall as any of the prairie grasses, 20 feet tall in Tama County. And the corn made the tribe even richer and more proud than they had ever been before. They grew so rich and proud of their corn that they built giant palaces and would commission the greatest architects in Chicago to come design them in places like Sioux City. And they would invite sitting presidents of the United States to come to see the corn palaces, and they would come with captains of industry. And when they were done, they would tear them down and feed them to the cows and to the pigs, who would grow fat and beautiful and of flesh such as white men had never tasted before. And they made the tribe even richer and more proud to be Iowans. And the corn and the cows and the pigs all flourished in Iowa, and everyone was happy. And everyone was rich and powerful, but no one was too rich or powerful. It was a utopian dreamland. And things were fine and well. And 100 years ago today, the Chamber of Commerce president in Des Moines wrote the Iowa Corn Song. And everyone sang it proudly, as I did when I was in kindergarten. "We are from Iowa, yo-ho, yo-ho, yo-ho. That's where the tall corn grows, yo-ho, yo-ho, yo-ho." And it was a time of bounty, and there was nothing not to be proud of. And then about the time that our tribe followed your tribes into the Second World War, things began to change terribly. And the god of the tall prairie grass, he frowned upon the land. And when the warriors returned to Iowa from the Second World War, they didn't want to farm the land anymore. They didn't want to live on the land anymore. Over half the counties in Iowa peaked in population more than 100 years ago. If the 19th century was the story of endless waves of immigrants moving into Iowa, the 20th century was the story of the depopulation of the land, as the people left the land and moved into the cities. And the industrialists bought the land and planted corn that could feed pigs and create pork that politicians could go down on, get down with. And terrible things began to happen to the pigs. The pigs were thrown into confinements where they were fed so close together, and they were kept alive so that an acceptable death rate was only 2 dumpsters a week. And that's of pigs that died before they were 6 months old and old enough to be slaughtered at 300 pounds. And the cattle were sent out west where the land was cheaper and they could be even more expendable. And the antibiotics that kept the death rate down, well, they made us immune to them, and all of a sudden staph infections became more deadly than all the sexually transmitted diseases in the United States, because the antibiotics don't work on them anymore. So today, Iowans are ambivalent. You can tell the 2 types of Iowans by the t-shirts they wear. The type A alpha Iowans wear t-shirts that say, I'm not really here for myself, I'm here because of my job, I'm really from Club Med or San Francisco or Harvard. And they won the battle of the 2 Iowan tribes. They won in the great Civil War over girls' basketball rules. The old-fashioned beta Iowans loved the fact that Iowa had a game for girls when no other state allowed girls to participate in sports. But when the lawyers made the other states let girls play sports, they played boys' rules. And the alpha Iowans were humiliated and embarrassed that Iowa rules were different. But they owned the ink that was made out of the corn, and they won the war. And now that's all that's left for the beta Iowans, who wear t-shirts that say things like Iowa, simple messages of pride. And the beta Iowans, they plan their vacation every year around the state fair, where they camp from the beginning until the end. And they don't understand why everyone doesn't do the same thing. But they're very glad that everyone doesn't, because otherwise it would be very hard for their squaws to get back into the campground after an overnight pass for things like giving birth. Thank you.